Hi. What is it? If you could, sir, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Robert J. Schwalb. I'm a game designer, and I'm the company owner and main designer for Schwalb Entertainment, a art tabletop RPG publishing company that focuses on Shadow the Demon Lord, Punkapolcalytic, and other games of a similar vein.
Yes. What is it? Some of my personal favorites, as it turns out.
Excellent.
uh, what is it? I am Ryan Sesney, the director of the gaming track for JordanCon, and this is part of our online content, basically in lieu of a con.
Ah,
Because,
cool.
plagues.
Plagues, they happen.
Yeah. Um, so, sir, um, what was let me see. What was your first role-playing game that you worked on?
Uh, I've started fooling around in the tabletop business in the early aughts. I'd just gotten out of college after my second go, and EN World was the place I checked because I was a hardcore third edition D&D fan, because early days of that edition, and having played D&D for pretty much most of my life. Um, I kept looking for just news and updates, and I saw that a couple companies were asking, had open calls for game designers to pitch books. So I did. I pitched a book to a company in the UK, and they bought the book, which led to a second book. That led to my first job at Green Ronin Publishing, doing some freelance for them, and then at a certain point, I had enough work that I was able to leave the flooring business that I was in. I was a salesman for selling carpet and hardwood floors and ceramic tile and all that stuff.
Hmm,
Left that and did this full time. And I guess within 6 months, I was the line developer for D20 products for Green Ronin Publishing.
nice. And what was your the first book you worked on, if you don't mind me asking?
It was The Quintessential Witch by Mongoose Publishing.
Oh.
It's a long time ago. Please don't go looking for it.
No, just curious. I like the title. It really rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, it was part of their Mongoose was doing a series of class and race books that were in the same vein as the complete books that TSR had published for second edition. So the
Hmm.
Complete Fighter's Handbook, Complete Paladin's Handbook, and they were doing the same kind of thing. And they had published almost, I guess, the first four or five. There were base classes, so the Rogue, the Fighter, and the Wizard. And Mike Merles did a couple of those. And I pitched the Witch as a way to kind of shake it up, and they liked the idea.
Hmm. Well, that's cool. Uh, you, up until this point, what would you say is the product you're most proud of, either from an award won or just personal accomplishment?
I think Shadow the Demon Lord probably has to be it. It's a complicated question because it's complicated for me to answer this one because first of all, Shadow the Demon Lord was the first product I released under my own imprint. As part of the Kickstarter and the design process, I also launched a company. I've released over
Hmm.
200 titles for this game since. It's it has kind of taken over my life for the last 4 or 5 years, and the fact that I'm able to keep the lights on and my cats fed thanks to this book. I feel like it's the one that probably takes the prize. That said, I'm also very proud of having been invited to participate in the design development of fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons. I was part of the design team for the newest edition, which has taken the world by storm, and so that's a pretty big gold star to have by my name to having
Hmm.
worked on that. So it was pretty cool. Yeah.
No, I understand that. And what is it? I can definitely see the thorough line of logic there, but what is it as far as the relation between the two products? For those of the that have never actually played the Boon Bane system in Shadows of the Demon Lord is what is it? Very reminiscent of Advantage Disadvantage, but in my humble opinion, a bit more balanced.
Yeah, I felt like uh, when I was working on Fifth, we had talked about, Advantage was a way for the game system to scoop up the traditional lots of micro bonuses that people go hunting for in gameplay. And so it allows you to just kind of solve that problem by just having the big extra die roll. And same thing, and the inverse of that being disadvantage with the take the lowest of the two. The trouble with that is that I always felt like if that's the only tool in your toolbox, everything, of course, is gonna it creates some very strange situations. It's also very limiting in some respects. I think advantage does fine for D&D, but I prefer the nuance of a smaller die, and it's largely because Boons and Banes allow you to exceed what the D20 can produce, and also so you can go above 20, you can go below 1, which means you can have spectacular failure and incredible success. Where the D20, rolling a second D20 doesn't actually make a situation, it just makes you better at doing what you can already do, where Boons and Banes let you do things you might not ordinarily be able to do.
Sure, sure. No, I understand. And as I said, I'm a big fan of that as it works for the Shadow of the Demon Lord.
Thanks.
Hmm. What is it? That feels weird. I never get to actually thank people for that kind of thing. But what is it? What about your work most excites you? Be it a type of product like a module versus a splat book, or just what is it? Writing versus layout. What is an ideal day at work for you?
An ideal, well, I'm happiest when I'm deep in the guts of a game, when I'm building the mathematical architecture that underpins the entire experience. I get a little tired of doing a lot of the surface work, a lot of the fiddly bits where you got to basically you're just doing content creation based on the engine, but figuring out what a character ought to be able to do in the third act of your campaign versus what that character does in the first act, and making sure the math works. That's very exciting to me.
Mm.
I do not like writing adventures. I find adventure writing to be very tedious, and I loathe wasting content. And it's very tricky for me to build adventures that allow players to have meaningful choices and to really map out the full spectrum of possibilities without throwing away 9/10 of what you're actually writing. And I'm kind of making peace with that. I've certainly written plenty of adventures, but it's always the same crisis every time I approach it. How do I do this and give the illusion of meaningful choice, and still be able to tell the story that we need to be told, and then give the game master or referee or dungeon master enough material to insulate them in case something goes horribly, horribly wrong.
And it usually does.
It almost always does. Yeah.
Um, of course. What is it? I will just as an observation for some of your products that I've enjoyed. Most of the add-ons to Shadow of the Demon Lord contain a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
What is it? You'll have a little bit of a splat book, a little bit of a what is it? A little bit of a history of the lore and of whatever particular topic you're talking about, and a little bit. There's usually like a little adventure at the end of it. Uh, Almost without exception that I can think of. I think cultic philosophy may be the one exception.
Cult
Off the
Philosophy was a more focused book as far as
Yeah,
what it was trying to do. The model of providing the model for those expansion books, with the two that really kind of broke away from that were not Cult Philosophy, Uncertain Faith, and Hunger in the Void. But although they both did not include adventures. Or wait, did Uncertain Faith include adventure? I can't remember. Hunger in the Void did not, although we released one separately later. The objective for those particular products was that I wanted to treat them as module plugins for your game.
Hmm.
So Shadow of the Demon Lord provides gives you everything you need to play the game. But if you want to play crazy Vikings that have blood of giants flowing through their veins, and you're tackling massive dragons and dealing with mountain giants that are as tall as skyscrapers, then A Glorious Death is a product for you. Or if you want to make deals and bargains with devils and have Hell take a more center stage, a central role in your campaigns, and really kind of undermine what little good there is, then Exquisite Agony is the book for you. And so I tried to make sure that those add-on products or those supplementary things kind of gave you all the tools you needed to flavor your game along that particular theme.
Hmm. And I think in that regard, you did very well, at least in my opinion.
Thanks.
What is it? Uh, I'm noticing with both of your major product lines, they are kind of unapologetically grim. Uh, what is it? Both Punk Apocalyptica and Shadow of the Demon Lord. Uh, they, although, there's nothing to say that you can't have epic heroes going through and, you know, uh, beating the devil or whatever, but they tend towards the grim and dark side. Was that your personal preference coming through, or was that just you took a look and you saw that games like Fifth Edition and such weren't providing that, and you said, "Hey, I can do that."
I think it's the cheap answer is to say a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B.
Hmm.
On the one hand, I am very cynical when it comes to tabletop RPGs. I've been playing these games for closing in on 35 years.
Hmm.
So I've seen high fantasy and heroic deeds and all those kinds of things to the point where, it's like, well, I don't think there needs to be another story about a farm boy who grows up to save the town. Or if the farm boy does that, he's got some sort of major flaw. That maybe the reason he's able to save the town is because he found his dad's spell book and summoned a demon who gave him a sword, and that's what allowed him to slay the beast. But now the local hero is corrupted in some way. I also don't like clean endings. Sometimes, and that sometimes life rarely gives you opportunities when you can just do the right thing without there being a consequence. Sometimes there are no good outcomes. And I think that's an area for storytelling that is interesting to mine, because everything else just becomes popcorn, I guess. It's become a dessert, and I'd rather have a meal.
Oh, absolutely. What is it? The point of choice is always a fun thing for somebody that likes to run games and playing such things myself. I mean, if you can get out clean, it's usually not a very interesting choice. I completely understand. What is it? And as much as you deal with kind of for lack of a better word, kind of a cosmically horrific situation in games like Shadow of the Demon Lord, it doesn't really cross that line into horror, like in the same way that like maybe Call of Cthulhu or Savage Worlds tends to. Where is that balance point in your opinion?
I think really I sold Shadow of the Demon Lord as a horror fantasy game because I wanted to choose horrific elements into the fantasy genre.
Hmm.
And I think that in some cases I managed that, but in others I think that it is also a grim dark or dark fantasy experience. I think the big thing, and this kind of it goes back to what we were talking about before, is that with dark fantasy sees player characters put in positions where there are rarely good outcomes, or good outcomes, but they come at a price. Situations that are morally gray, fighting working for people who are complex characters with serious and debilitating flaws in both character and in other ways. And you might, it's like in D&D, you might find an intelligent sword, and that intelligent sword might be a trickster, but that trickster sword is still going to help you attain your objectives because it's your treasure. However, if you find an intelligent sword in Shadow of the Demon Lord, that sword is going to eventually corrupt you and then turn you into a monster or destroy everyone around you because you're keeping this weapon to gain power or whatever you're trying to do. Now, where the difference between grimdark and horror, though, I would say the difference with horror, and especially in role-playing games, is that horror often takes away player agency as the penalty. When you're playing Call of Cthulhu and things go horribly, horribly wrong, your character, you lose control of your alter ego, either because you're weeping, screaming, clawing at your eyes, running around in circles, a la Homer Simpson. And that is kind of the cost because your characters are fragile. They need to be in order for you to feel the tension. I guess you could make, and that's kind of part of the reason. That's kind of part of the thing that Shadow of the Demon Lord does too, is that characters are terrifyingly fragile at the start.
Oh yeah.
There are big jumps in power, but then there are also bigger consequences for the things you're going up against as you play through the campaign. Yeah.
Okay. No, I get you there. What is it? And in a lot of cases, I'll say it does a very good job of writing that line too.
Thanks.
Yeah. What is it? Uh, as uh, as the industry has changed and progressed over the years, what is it? Digital mediums are becoming a little bit more towards the more prominent within the industry. We're getting a very nice shot of like your massive library back there, but what is it? Frankly, a lot of people that are coming into the hobby like nowadays, that's not something that they're actively doing. Their PDF, file storages are becoming, their bookshelves, as it were. How do you see that affecting, the future of yourself and other game designers?
I think that I think now more than ever, I think that digital delivery systems for book publishing is really the only way to go. I think the model of the dead tree model still serves me in some capacity, but availing ourselves of print on demand, mitigating risk as far as print runs. So it's just a game changer as far as being able to do this. You couldn't have a company of my size survive 20 years ago. It just wasn't possible. And Monty Cook did it first with his company when he was releasing third edition PDFs. They made a really good business in that. But he also had penetration into the book trade and the retail trade by way of his partnership with Sword and Sorcery Studios, or whatever they were called, that subcategory of White Wolf. Now I don't even think you'd have to do that. And that's part of the reason why I haven't looked to make a partnership deal to move my products more into print form, because I don't think the audience is there for it. I think people are fine absorbing the content digitally, and if they want the print options, then we provide products that make sense to do it as a print, down the print route. It is more expensive and the margins are much, much, much tighter, but there's no upfront cost. I also think that if the pandemic is teaching us all sorts of lessons every day, but one of them is that we still can play role-playing games and we still can play board games without having to be together in person.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And Tabletop Simulator, we've been playing that lately, using that as our platform. And it's incredible that we can play a game like Scythe, or we can play Wingspan, or we can play Cthulhu's, what's that giant Cthulhu monster game?
Arkham Horror?
Not Arkham Horror, but there's the other one, Cthulhu Wars.
Yeah.
We can do all those things in the Tabletop Simulator. And if we're playing a role-playing game that doesn't rely on miniatures or props, then we can just do a theater of the mind through even something as simple as Facebook Messenger. It's and we're still having a good time. We're still hanging out and spending time together and getting that interaction. It's not the same, and I will always take in-person interactions, but it really makes it just shows it's come to show how powerful these tools are, and it allows people to play with other folks all around the world, and that's great.
Oh, sure, sure. Um, and if you don't mind me saying so, what is it? I have noticed that certain other companies are, for instance, starting to branch out on this with what is it? Third-party companies to expand on digital mediums. For instance, and I'm gonna mess up this name because I don't speak German, but Zepfinder has a version of their game that's basically optimized for smartphone. What is it? D&D has D&D Beyond, which is a third-party company that basically is a wiki-like
Right.
reference site. Do you see what is it? Your company branching out into those sorts of things?
We've been working with a couple different. We've had a couple different goes at it. At one point, we had an app that was about a third of the way through development, but I think that's kind of fallen apart. Really, at this point, it's
Hmm.
I don't have the resources to fund a major development, but I am always open to someone who wants to take it on themselves.
Oh, sure, sure.
Partnership deal. But yeah, we've definitely been. I'm definitely interested in that.
Yeah. What is it? And out of curiosity, because you have a little bit of a better view of the industry, I think, from where you're sitting than most of us. Do you see that becoming a major focus with like a lot of the bigger publishers? What is it? Modifius, Fantasy Flight, that sort of thing?
Maybe. I remember a few years ago, I was on a panel at DragonCon, and I just proposed to the audience that what if your tabletop role playing game didn't have any books? What if your interface was only something like D&D Beyond, where you didn't have when you made a character, it automates all of it for you, and you
Hmm.
don't have to go hunting through a book to go through this archaic method of character creation, and you can actually have a lot of complexity and depth to character creation if it's automated and not a time sink. And there was a huge amount of pushback. But I think that for the companies that are big, like Wizards of the Coast,
Hmm.
I would imagine that could be a real way for them to proceed and get the game into hands of even more people because right now D&D is more popular than it's ever been. But I imagine if whenever the inevitable sixth edition or seventh edition comes out, they're going to look at different ways to get that product in the hands of as many customers as possible by whatever means they can.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah.
But what is it? And if my memory serves correctly, I believe fourth edition basically what they attempted to do something similar to that. They basically had what is it? I'm blanking on the details, but essentially you were paying membership to a compendium where you could get basically all the books,
Right.
uh, future and past, and basically they were supposed to be, keep adding to that as they went
Yeah, it was a
along.
really bold initiative because they had this whole digital component to fourth edition that was supposed to kind of revolutionize gameplay because there was going to be a character visualizer, a tabletop, virtual tabletop.
Mm.
There was a character creator, and then they had the compendium. Uh, and then you also had regular new content coming by way of Dragon and Dungeon magazine. And had that digital platform gone off, I think uh, it was interesting about that is that that was such a long it doesn't feel it feels like it was just yesterday, but it really was a long time ago, and it really anticipated the changing of the marketplace into its current form. I think had that idea kicked off, it could have done a lot more. It could have really revolutionized gameplay. But
Oh,
I
sure.
also think that it was a bigger idea than I don't know. I don't have much inside details as far as why that failed. I mean, I worked for Wizards as a contractor at that time, but I wasn't on that side of the business really at all.
Fair enough, fair enough. Well, let's what is it? Moving right along. you have some exquisite art
Thank you.
in your books, if you don't mind me saying. And what is it? The direction is very interesting and thematic for what you're going for, which is a very dark fantasy. Um, what is it? How big of a component do you feel that art is in the overall success of an RPG product?
I come down to on the side of art is probably the most important part of an RPG product. Nothing will sell a book faster than the way it looks.
Mm,
If a book looks good and somebody has no idea what it's about, they're going to buy it just to look at the cool pictures. And then the trick is that you've got great art and you've got a game system that can be absorbed, then you've got customers. Otherwise, you just got neat art books. I think a lot of people uh, undervalue what art can do for their products. I also think people also undervalue what quality layout can do for their products.
mm.
Um, I'm very lucky to have an incredible layout graphic designer, Kara Hamilton. She does all the work for me, and she's astounding. Um, but we're always improving. We're always looking for ways to make the book sexier, more approachable, and and construct products that allow the customer to both visualize what we're talking about through quality art, and then also be able to find the information they need on the page. But yeah, I love the artist I work with. It's one of my favorite parts of my job is working with the artist and working with them to bring the crazy ideas in my head to life. It's a really fun part of the game.
Oh, I imagine it is. Yeah, just kind of a follow-up on that. Uh, there have been somewhat there have been a lot of variations in especially if you go into like classic monsters, a beholder from just as a common touchstone from like 1982 versus today is very different art style, very different what is it aesthetic look, but it was and part of it may have been because like it wasn't what is it there wasn't a lot of competition back in those days too, but uh, there seems to be a lot more uniformity um, as far as the art style. Not to say that an individual artist's expression can't be seen through it, but it does look like everybody is kind of like uh, within a certain genre of game is kind of like working off of the same what is it template.
I think a big part of that has a lot to do with the medium, right? You know, 20 years ago, you had people like Todd Lockwood who would do a D&D, who would do art for the interiors and covers
Hmm.
with a paintbrush and on a canvas or a board. And people don't do that anymore, and that's fine. And I certainly couldn't afford to use someone to hire someone who does traditional does in a traditional medium, and because mostly it just takes so long.
Oh,
Uh,
sure.
I mean, I'm looking at the Diablo 4 art that somebody sent me, and it's gorgeous, but it's definitely it's definitely done on a tablet or a digital canvas. But I will say that I think that when people started using tablets to create art, when at the very start of that, you could tell, and it looked weird, and it was a bit off. But as the software is becoming incredible, and we're seeing a whole new generation of really skilled digital artists who are able to produce some astonishing stuff. Matteo Spirito, Mirko Paganesi, Biagio D'Alessandro, Jack Kaiser. I mean, the list goes on. Katarina Layden. These are people that all work in the same kind of stuff, and they're not similar, but there is kind of you do feel like it all is of a piece. They they share elements in common. Yeah.
Oh, sure. What is it? And I know we're getting on a bit long here. Just to speed things up, what is it? As I've mentioned earlier, in this video, the Boon Bane system is, uh, I feel, quite unique and sets Shadow of the Demon Lord apart from like a lot of other games in its application, as well as its effect on gameplay. How important do you think a unique dice or mechanic like that is for overall game design?
I think there's a fine line between utility versus gimmick. I think that in some cases, companies will, or some games will use custom dice, for example, in order to one, sell their custom dice, and that seems to be. But then and then two, to create a lot of nuance in what's going on when you actually throw the dice. No, I'm not trying to throw shade on any particular company. I don't have a problem with custom dice. I think custom dice we've had custom dice since Fudge, and probably longer. And I think that's totally fine, provided that it serves the needs of the game. But if you can do something with your dice rolls or dice mechanics or whatever mechanics you're doing that make it so that you can make the game playable, and you want the mechanics to serve the interest of the story you're trying to tell, the easiest is often the best choice. So, for example, in Shadow of the Demon Lord, we don't have an initiative system because I think that is to resurrect Dave Noonan's. I think it was Dave Noonan who called certain things proud nails in D&D that people would just kind of walk around, and grappling was one of them back in third edition because it was so complicated. I think it's not the same thing, but in the case with like initiative systems, it's one of those ugly spots in a lot of role-playing games because you're in this really deep story narrative mode and you're going back and forth and you're describing stuff, the players telling what they want to do, and all of a sudden a fight breaks out. And then when that fight breaks out, everything stops as you go through this completely ancient and unnecessary mode of setting up a turn order that changes either every round or every fight or whatever, and has almost no bearing on what's going to happen in the fight after the first round. So I was looking at that, and I mean, I had all sorts of different initiative systems for Demon Lord before I finally decided, to hell with it. We don't have an initiative system. It's just not there. You guys go, then I'll go, and then you guys go. And that's pretty much how that was. It's not that I probably did anything with that mechanic that anybody could have come up with that. It's just punting to some extent, but it's also there is craft there, right? I mean, monster design reflects the nature of the way the turn order works in Demon Lord, and the different phases that happen with fast turns, slow turns are important because you might go slow at the start of the fight because you have to move in position, but then as the game goes through the fight, people are going fast, which then necessarily speeds up what they're doing on their turn because they're only doing one thing because they want to go before the monsters. So it rewards them by letting them punch the monsters in the face, but also punishes them by taking away some of their action economy. If that makes sense. So, I mean, those are and that's one of those kind of things where it's like, well, this is serving the story and the needs of the game. There is a bit of a gimmick because we sell custom fast slow tokens, but they're gewgaws and you don't need them. But the mechanisms of the game obviously is what I guess what I'm trying to say. Serve the needs of the experience. And Boons and Banes are the same thing.
Oh, sure. What is it? And I'm glad you brought up the initiative system because what is it? That is a very refreshing part of Shadow of the Demon Lord as well. Not having to go through and order everybody and you mentioned your custom tokens for the fast turn, slow turn, but it's a lot easier than a lot of products for other role-playing games like D&D that has like, oh well, you get this ribbon on your GM screen, or you got this entire dry erase board that we set up behind the
right. Yeah, I remember how many how many times you spend 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes or 7 minutes, and that time is precious. I in the old days when I was much younger and was less concerned with how I was spending my time because I didn't have that much pressure on me, I could play a role playing game for 5 or 6 or 8 hours. And then I got older, and then time became more of a crunch. We'd play for 4 or 5 hours, and
Mm.
now we're lucky to get 2.5 hours in a session.
Oh, sure,
And
sure.
so when time is such a precious commodity, you got to shave off the areas you can shave off. And if you have to go through this hoop where every time you're going to get into a fight, it lasts an hour, or you have to spend 4 or 5 minutes just getting everybody figure out when they go, and then you have to remember that. And heaven forbid somebody changes when they want to go in the turn. Oh yeah.
Yep.
And I'm not wagging a finger at D&D. All sorts of games use initiative.
Oh yeah. What is it? They're far from the only person there. I will say that what is it? Off the top of my head, like the biggest counterexample to that is ICRPG. The turn order is whatever you're sitting in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just basically okay, you, now you, now you, now me. Okay, now you again. But I digress. What is it? Lastly, what future products or what's on the horizon that you're most excited about?
Probably the thing that's got me, I guess, that's blowing up my skirt, so to speak, is Shadow of the Mad Wizard. Um, Originally, this product was called. It's had so many different names. It was once called the Shadow of the Witch King. It was once called Four Towers, the Free Companies of Four Towers, and Free Companies, and now it's Shadow of the Mad Wizard. But the original plan was for me to take Demon Lord and strip out all the gross horror elements and make a straightforward, semi-high fantasy tabletop RPG. Um, as I was going into the design of this, I realized that I would never be satisfied if I just cleaned up Demon Lord and dumped it out. So instead, what I've done was I want to make this game its own thing. And after 5 years of Demon Lord, I feel like this is a way for me to take what I've learned from what I did in Shadow of the Demon Lord and also from Punkapolcalytic and apply those lessons to a new fantasy game for the next 5 years. So right now we've got the players' content is basically done, and I am currently working on the game master content, which includes world building and the bestiary and general rules and rewards and stuff like that. I expect to bring that assuming that the world doesn't burn up in the next year, and we all live through this. I will bring it to Kickstarter probably in the fall.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yeah, and I'll be doing. We're gonna be doing more. There'll be a limited public playtest. There will be blog posts, and there'll be YouTube videos of us playing this game, and probably me doing Facebook Live stuff to kind of explain why I make certain decisions that I make and show off certain aspects of the game to raise awareness. You try to do it the right way, get some excitement going. But
All right.
we've had we have been play testing this for about a year, and right now the game is very stable. The players really dig it. There are tons and tons of options. There are more options in this game than there are in Demon Lord, so it should be very exciting.
That is saying something, sir.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool. We
Yeah.
already split it in 2 books though, and I think the Kickstarter plan right now is that if you go for the main backer level, you get a full 11 adventure arc campaign, plus you get the game master's book and the player's book and probably some other stuff too. So you get a bunch of stuff for your money right up front, and then hopefully it'll explode the same way Demon Lord did, and then we'll be able to do another 200 products for this game too. And that being said, I'm still working on stuff for Demon Lord, still working on stuff for Punkapolcalytic. And I have I'm kicking off a series of mini games called, I think there's the tentatively titled Worlds in Shadow. The first one is called Lost and Found, where you play children who wake up in a terrifying orphanage, and your goal is to get out.
Hmm.
So it should be neat. But these are all the mini games are intended to be self-contained. You only play them for as long as you would probably take to play 3 or 4 game sessions.
Oh, sure,
The
sure.
price point's low, game system's really light, character options are necessarily small, but it's all about mood, flavor, tone.
Okay. And are these what is it? Your shorter games, are they D20 base?
They will vary. I had originally planned on just using the Demon Lord engine for all of these, but as I started working in Lost and Found, actually, in fact, once I had the first draft of it done, I realized that there was no point in adopting or going through the hoops of trying to make it marry with these other games, but rather make the game system do what it needs to do in order to tell the stories I want us to tell.
Well, as somebody that's a sucker for niche little one-shot games, what is it? Take my money, sir.
All right, awesome.
Um, what is it? Finally, I would like to circle back on, you said that you were going to maybe launch some actual plays and videos about you talking about the game design aspect.
Yeah.
Do you have a YouTube channel, or is this going to be through your website?
We'll have a YouTube channel set up for it, and it'll also be on the website.
Awesome. And that website is?
Schwalbentertainment.com, and that's SCHWALB, entertainment.com.
Yes. Well, thank you, sir. You've been a delightful guest. Is there anything you would like to say before we part ways here?
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk with you today, and stay safe, stay sheltered, and stay healthy.
Yeah. Avoid cabin fever however you can. Hopefully
That's right.
by playing an interesting and exciting game of Shadow of the Demon Lord.
Hell yeah.
Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome.
And
Was that all right?